A lot of people have been leaving comments lately on our channel that Bill Gates is the largest landowner in the United States. And I thought it would be interesting to do a video on this because I've done some research on it, and you know, these articles that were published in recent times, they're just reflecting on, you know, assets of certain billionaires and what they actually own. And I thought it would just be fun to actually clarify what this means and how deep Bill's hands actually go into agriculture, because our channel covers agriculture. Why not? So first of all, I think I should start off with just saying that when it comes to Bill Gates, he would probably not even make it on my acquaintance list on Facebook. I'd probably defriend him because we have enough differences that we would not get along in a conversation. I think that my belief system and his belief system are very different. But I also believe that, you know, to some extent, he is acting in a virtuous way to his virtues and his beliefs.
If we see someone doing something wrong, that we know to be wrong, someone is starting to sin, to use a theological term, let alone just make a simple mistake. How do we justify not initiating coercion? Are we not sinning if we don't stop him? I know only two answers occur to me that make any sense about that. One is, which I regard as largely an evasion, there's no virtue in his not sinning if he's not free to sin. That may be true, but then that doesn't apply to me. Maybe no virtue for him. That doesn't mean I should let him sin, because I'm sinning when I let him sin. How do I justify letting him sin? I think the most persuasive answer is, can I be sure he is sinning? How can I be sure I am right and he is wrong? That I know what sin is. Fundamentally, is that no simple principle is really adequate. We do not have all the answers. And there is no simple formula that will give us all the answers. That's why humility, tolerance, is so basic, is so fundamental. Because the only way we can allow a process to go on, whereby we can get a little closer and closer to those fundamental principles, is by being tolerant, by recognizing and welcoming the opinions of people who fundamentally disagree with us.
The thing that you have to remember, and the thing that I think everybody needs to understand, is that just because somebody is virtuous does not mean that they're looking out for your best interests. They're looking out for a set of beliefs or ideals that they feel are in your best interest. And that's one of the things that people need to recognize and comprehend, especially when they're worshiping certain people or bowing down to certain people. But I don't think that people are necessarily out there just acting with bad intent all the time. Of course, and I'll get to this in this video, there are some things that I think are questionable, but it's not meant to bash. I think that everybody knows that we all have our own set of virtues and that we need to manage those on our own and not put them upon others to do that for us. That's been a belief system, I think, in a lot of countries. Is a belief system here in the United States that is fundamentally flawed. I mean, you can't expect somebody else to act on your behalf.
You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us. Well, I don't even trust you to do that.
So let's get down to the fun facts. Is Bill Gates actually the largest landowner in the United States? No. Johnny Malone, the cable cowboy, owns 2.2 million acres compared to Bill Gates' 288,000 acres. So to put that in perspective, there's somebody that owns 2 million acres more than Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates is the largest farmland owner in the United States, and his farmland interests extend across 19 states. He has just under 269,000 total farmland acres. And when we're looking at Johnny Malone and comparing what he owns to what Bill Gates owns, I'm thinking that when they're saying farmland, they're talking about cultivated land, not necessarily rangeland, mountain ranges, forests, things like what Johnny Malone would be invested in. Now, he owns all of this through a company called Cascade Investments, which should not be confused with Cascade Investment Group, which is an actual company. Cascade Investments LLC is an umbrella corporation. It is a fund, and most of their assets are probably honestly owned under other LLCs. So if you were to try and go on maps and look up, property ownerships for Cascade Investments, unless you knew every single LLC that they had that they managed, you wouldn't possibly be able to know everything that they own. Now, Cascade Investments is managed by Michael Larson, and I'm not talking about the controversial game show winner in 1984, Michael Larson. Michael Larson was a business advisor. He was a headhunter working for Gates, picked him up in 1994, and at that time, Cascade Investments was otherwise known as Bill Gates Investments, and they turned it into Cascade's Investments to have a generic name so that they could operate under the radar. Now, this throws a lot of people off, and it makes a lot of people mad. Why would you want to be operating under the radar? Why can't I know that you're the one coming to me to buy my land? I get it, though. From an investor standpoint, from somebody who's looking to go grow a portfolio or do business, there's an unfair advantage to knowing who the other side is. I've been in real estate for years, and the one thing that everybody always wants to know, if I bring a buyer to the table to put an offer in on a property, and I'm representing the sellers always want to know everything they can about the buyer. And it goes the other way around. The buyer wants to know everything they can about the sellers. Whereas the most important thing that should matter in the equation is the land and what it's worth to you and what it's worth to them. But the reason why you would want to know the information about who's buying or information about who's selling is to take advantage of them. Now, in some respects, because of public records, you could take advantage of a seller if they're in bankruptcy, if they haven't filed their taxes for a while. You could find public records on the seller to get information on them. But at the same time, we shouldn't be looking at that stuff. We should just be looking at what the fair value of something is and create a fair transaction between two parties. It never works out that way. But it certainly wouldn't work out that way if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, Bill Gates wants to buy your land," I'd say, "All right, triple the price." And that's why I think they operate under the radar. Is more or less it's hard to grow an investment portfolio if you're not operating under the radar, if you're somebody like Bill Gates. Now, that said, the best time to buy is when there's blood in the streets. And so I think you'll probably see Cascade Investments getting a lot larger soon. When you talk about bigger, when Michael Larson took over the advisement of Gates Investments, or now Cascade Investments, back in 1994, it was at $11.5 billion. Now it's up over $80 billion. I've heard some estimates of over $100 billion. I own, I don't even own 1% of what Bill Gates owns, so I can't even make a comparison. I can't fathom 288,000 acres. And Johnny Malone, man, you're just killing it at 2.2. And Michael Larson recruited an old professor of his out of retirement to be an advisor to him as he managed this investment portfolio for Bill Gates. His name was Jerry St. Dennis. And Jerry St. Dennis is actually an interesting character because since joining as an advisor, he's actually been put on several corporate boards by Bill Gates, or at least recommended to the boards to be a board member, and he's working as an advisor for Bill Gates' largest investment portfolio. But Jerry St. Dennis, it may surprise you to know this, but he was actually the Secretary of Treasury for the Reagan administration. And Reagan is actually one of my favorite presidents. So I'm guessing that Bill Gates is very good about who he brings on board as advisors, people who are very into what they're doing. It was actually surprising to me, knowing some of Bill Gates's beliefs, or what I presume to be his belief system, that he would choose somebody from the Reagan administration to act as an advisor. But when it comes to economics, I guess you want the best, and Reagan economics was some of the best. It's just funny because he probably wouldn't support Reagan economics today. Now, Bill Gates has always been pretty involved with the agricultural industry. He donated $20 million to the International Rice Research Institute to help develop a new strand of GMO rice. There are a lot of particular benefits to the GMO rice. I did a video talking about GMOs a while back, GMOs and genetic modification. It is not something that I particularly am 100% supportive of. There are some cases where I think it could be useful or necessary. My biggest problem that I have with some of these things, it depends on the genetic modification, but when you start to put in proteins, for example, that aren't natural to our environment, regardless of what consumes that genetically modified food, those proteins don't break down, so they end up entering into our environment. And so you create almost an entirely new species that wasn't natural here in the first place. And I think, you know, when looking through some of Bill Gates's investments, like he recently dropped Arco, which I think was good. He's out of Monsanto, but it was his investment in Monsanto that made Monsanto what it was. He's very into new technology in the agricultural sector, and sometimes that technology can fail or end up being harmful in the long run. I am more of a traditional kind of guy. I think that we should look at natural ways of doing things. And, you know, they're trying to use science. I think looking at some of his investments now, they're trying to use science in a way to mimic what's natural. But mimicking what's natural still isn't natural. I wouldn't want to go into some of the things that he's in. But it doesn't mean that it's not smart. It doesn't mean that he's not acting out of virtue, because in a way he is trying to help solve food insecurity around the world, just naturally, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, though. I mean, you guys can think whatever you want to of it. You could think he's not virtuous. I'm not going to necessarily disagree with you on that. I'm just saying that, you know, not all of these intents are necessarily bad. You buy things under the radar so people don't know who you are. Any one of us would actually do that. You buy things when there's blood in the streets, because that's when you buy low, sell high. And, you know, when it comes to food security and the processes, you invest in the technology. But like I said, some of that technology has led to some very, very bad adverse things. And I think that's where a lot of people have really kind of built up their distaste. He's invested $100 million into the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Now that $100 million is actually an investment into funds to help develop science and technology for smaller producers to make them more productive. Again, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's the technology and some of these, you know, crazy science experiments that make me a little uneasy. He's invested in AgBiome. AgBiome basically is taking the concept of microbials, which I talk a lot about on our channel because I think that they're essential for our soil. They think that they're so essential that they're trying to duplicate microbes. They're trying to recreate microbes. Again, I question, you know, any science and technology that tries to create something else like a living organism that is not natural to our ecosystem. Is it up to me to decide whether or not the investment in that technology, the research in that technology, and trying to come up with other solutions is bad? I don't think that I have the right to make that decision in and of myself. I'd have to separate what my beliefs are from what they're actually doing, and just recognize the fact that they're trying to find some sort of level of progress. Ecochem is another similar business, but they're more or less in the chemical side of things, trying to develop ecologically friendly chemicals, if you can do that. Stellapps is a company that develops technology for monitoring dairy products. Dairy, I'm guessing somewhere out there, Bill Gates may actually own a dairy farm. I don't know. I have no idea what his actual holdings are. One of the interesting things that I read about, now I would never buy one of these fruits, but he is invested in something called Apeel Sciences. And so Apeel Sciences is actually the name kind of, I think Katy Perry or a couple other big names are invested in this. But so what they do is they take food waste, average food scraps, things that we would use for compost for chickens and stuff in gardens. But they take food waste and they recycle the food waste to make a fake peel that could then be put around apples and other fruits. And it's edible because it's made out of food waste, so it's edible. It's perfectly okay to eat this stuff that's been processed into a fake peel. And it helps retain the juices in the fruit. It helps preserve the fruit longer and keep it edible longer, so you have less food waste there. So it's kind of like taking food waste and then it's turning it into a preservative to help reduce food waste. So the concept overall sounds like a pretty good concept. I would never eat that fruit. But those are also health choices that I think that we can all make as individuals. He's invested in Beyond Meat, the Impossible Burger, and Memphis Meats. Memphis Meats is the lab-grown stuff. All of this stuff is very unnatural, very weird. It's weird science. And I would probably never eat it. I would never encourage my kids to eat it. But I'm not going to discourage somebody else from eating it. If they want to eat it, they can eat it. You know, no offense, but some fake burger meat is not going to impact my business. When you look at the actual growth numbers of these things, you're talking about a 60% growth rate in fake meat last year, but it's only got like 1% of the market, whereas there was a 15% increase in actual meat consumption last year. So it's not growing nearly as fast as the overall meat industry, and I don't think it ever will. I think that there are too many people who are conscientious of eating natural foods that some of these things may not ever take off to be very significant. I think a couple years ago I was reading an analyst's opinion that he thought it would end up being good dog food. But there are people out there who really feel passionate about eating this stuff, and I say, eat what you want. It's really not going to affect me. My business model is growing faster. And I don't think that, we should necessarily see it as a threat. Should it be labeled differently? Absolutely. I think people should know what they're eating and know that what they're eating is not what they think it is based on a label. One of the biggest problems I have in that industry, and I don't know if Gates is tied to it, but I've seen, across the board in several different industries, similar things, and you see his name pop up, but he's invested in so many different things. It's kind of like he's going to pop up in every bad corner, I feel like. But the point is that there's been a big misinformation campaign in order to promote those meats, in order to make it legislated that you have to eat certain meats or eat less of their competitor. That to me is absolutely wrong. They should not be doing that. And I know that that's where the money is. I did a Right to Farm video last year where I kind of dug into that. If you want to learn more about that, I'll put a link up there. But in that video, I talk a lot about the foreign investments in lawsuits, especially here in North Carolina. And it was in the hog industry. I don't support factory farming either, personally. But what I don't, again, it's a personal perspective. When it comes to trying to legislate things, to make laws to force others into a particular type of product or convince them through misinformation about different products to eat your product, that is wrong to me. I think that is a fundamentally flawed marketing campaign, and I don't like it. I wouldn't support any group like that.
When they come down to Washington and say we ought to continue regulation, do they say we ought to continue regulation in order to promote our interests? What do they say? They say the public will be hurt. They are affecting the trade for the public good. But do you think they're kidding themselves? They know they're not stupid.
They're not Santa Claus.
They're not Santa Claus. They are people who are promoting their own interest, and they're affecting the trade for the public good because that's the way to get things done. Nobody ever goes up to Congress and says, look, vote me a big bonanza of $100,000 because I'm a good man and I deserve $100,000 out of the public purse. No. So you have two classes of people, the so-called do-gooders. You have the honest, sincere people, and they invariably end up being the front men for private interests they would never knowingly support.
In any case, Bill is invested heavily in a lot of different agricultural products. If you think about it, from a Virtuous standpoint, we do have a food problem in the world that we need to try and solve, or there's going to be a lot of starving people not too far away from right now. And so is there, a virtuous act to that? Yes, but you can't dismiss the fact that, all of these people who are working on these things are doing it based on investment and return. And at some point, that crosses paths with the virtuous side of things.
By pursuing his own interest, that is to say, his meaning the person engaged in free enterprise, the person who functions within the capitalist free enterprise system, Adam Smith says, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectively than when he really intends. I have never known much good done by those who affected to trade for the public good, meaning spare me from the do-gooders, spare me from the people who intend to do good. Smith is saying if you honestly seek your own self-interest within the free enterprise system, society will be the beneficiary.
That's right.
That's a hard thing to...
But take the last part of that. I've never
Let's
known
see that
much,
again, Ronnie.
I've never known much good done. No, I don't have to see it. I've never known much good done by those who affected to trade for... Affected. Note he doesn't say did trade. Affected to trade for the public good. Now, that word affected is a very important point, because you must realize that people don't always express their real interests or their real values. They say what they think will be attractive to the public at large.
They want to create more production. They want to make things cheaper on the production side so that they can increase profits. And there's a lot of that motive mixed in on all of this stuff. You can't forget that these people are businessmen. And I know a lot of people who would disagree with some of their virtuous philosophies who are just as intelligent as they are, if not more. I don't look at these people and think, they're bad people. They're trying to take over the world. I do question their motives at times. I definitely, I don't personally think of them all as virtuous people. There are people that support what they're doing, and I think that that's fine. Do what you want, eat what you want. You want to eat some lab-grown burger? There's actually, I was reading about this, somebody had created a kit, and I think that this is the most self-sustainable thing you could do. They created a kit where you can swab the inside of your mouth and get some DNA glands and then grow your own steak made out of you in a dish. And I actually, in the article, their explanation said that it wasn't truly cannibalism because you're eating yourself and not somebody else. So I think that, when it comes to science and technology, you can eat whatever it is that you want. It's just, I'm not going to. I'm not going to put blame on others because they choose to eat these things. Where I think that the line has to be drawn is, like I said, when those motives and virtuous acts become hindering to people's ability to choose, their freedom to choose, in order to promote a product that you just happen to be invested in. Now that, to me, is absolutely wrong. And that's all I'm going to say about it on here. But that's the truth. He's not the largest landowner. He's the largest farmland owner. And I believe that those statistics are more or less focused on cultivated farmland, land that is cultivated for crops. I don't think that it is referring to pasture land or mountain ranges where livestock is grown. I would hand that one over to Johnny Malone, the cable cowboy.